Let's go. Welcome back. It's another episode of the Wobcast 2.0. It's Mike Wobschall, Wobby, here to talk tight ends, among many other things. Our position by position look at the Vikings roster heading into 2023 continues, while we also look to keep our ear to the ground on the many other happenings throughout the Vikings and National Football League world. So it's been 2 weeks since our last recording. A lot has happened since then. We're going to talk about all of it in a short amount of time. We're going to get to a lot of information. So it's going to be a quick hitting, fast running show. No one better to help me break it all down, though, than my usual partner. It's Gyles. How's it going, bud?
Hey, doing well. I've been on the road a little bit the past few weeks, so I'm glad to get in front of the mic again. I was just in Vegas right when they traded Jimmy G over to the Raiders. So all the women on the streets were definitely walking around with some smiles on. I don't know about you, but that's the reason my wife watches football. So lots going on in the football world.
There may be some other reasons that she watches football on my side of things, but I will certainly say that's among them. Yeah, that's certainly among them. And I would also say, I kind of find it easy to root for Jimmy G, and
he's a likable guy.
I think he is too. He's got that really sort of like suave, like clean image that some people naturally aren't attracted to or don't find it easy to root for that. But just the way he comes off, and I think he's mild-mannered. I think he's likable. I happen to find myself cheering for him a lot. And I think I will with the Raiders. And, he had the black suit and, he had the slick back hair. And I'm just like, that fits. I mean, from a brand standpoint, that is a signing that fits. Now, we'll see what happens on the field. But from an aesthetic standpoint, anyway, and a stylistic standpoint, that was I liked it. That's a good fit.
Yeah. And clearly they're hoping for this to be more of a plug and play mentality, considering that he has a background with Josh McDaniels back when he lived with the Patriots. The Patriots, or the Raiders rather, are kind of an interesting team. They have some really big strengths, but I feel like they're also kind of in a reset window. So they're kind of an enigma to me, where if they were really bad next year, I wouldn't be surprised. And if they found a way to be competitive, I also wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. But all that to say, they are in probably the most competitive division in football.
Well, they are. And I think what's really interesting about that Division II, Gyles, is what sort of improvement do we expect to be generated from Sean Payton joining the Broncos there with Russell Wilson? I think that's a huge X factor in that division, because there came a point last season where you wrote the Broncos and Russell Wilson off in that division. And probably in the first quarter of the season, it became pretty apparent that wasn't going to work out. So you went into the season thinking, geez, any of those four teams could win the division. And like a month into it, I think you were kind of counting the Broncos out, and the Raiders kind of just looked like the same old Raiders to me. Yeah. So this year, I think, again, we'll be looking at the West as like that could be a really tough division, So we'll be interesting to see how all that plays out. And I really don't root against anyone, and the AFC West, I really don't root against anyone there. I think that's a fun division to watch, and I'll be excited to watch it again here in 2023. But we're not here to talk about the AFC West. We're here to talk about the Minnesota Vikings. I thought, we sort of teased a couple of weeks ago that we'd continue that position by position preview of the Vikings roster, and we're going to get to tight ends today. So that'll be fun. We'll talk about TJ Hawkinson and Josh Oliver and what that position group will look like for the Vikings. But let's go through some of the news items that happened in the last 2 weeks, Gyles, while we were off the mic. We'll start with, before we get to Byron Murphy, let's start with Adam Thielen, as he says goodbye to Minnesota and hello to Carolina. He will play for the Carolina Panthers in 2023. He signed a 3-year deal. I think it was 21 or 22 million. I think it was
Sounds
worth.
Right.
Yeah. With the Carolina Panthers. Interesting to me. I don't know that many people, before seeing the reports that he was going to visit Carolina, I don't know that you would have pegged Carolina as a landing spot for him. I think you're looking at, is he going to go to the Chiefs or the Bills or the Jets and Rodgers or the Raiders, instant contender. So an interesting move. However, I think when you look at the whole picture, it kind of makes sense from a few different standpoints. And I don't think the Panthers are as far off from contending as some might think. And I'm not going to put my stamp on this and say the Panthers are a playoff team in 2023, but I'm certainly not ruling them out of it. I think they have a lot of things going in the right direction, or at least they've gotten a lot of awful things in Carolina sort of squared away and figured out. And then, of course, they execute the huge trade to get the number 1 overall pick in this year's draft. So all of this to say, interesting move, and I'll be rooting for Thielen in Carolina. And all in all, not shocked by his decision to go there. What did you think of it when you saw the headline?
Yeah, honestly, similar to you, I think when exploring free agency for someone like Adam, I think there's 3 main things that come into play. What are you going to get paid? What does the quality of life look like? Maybe like what's the weather like? Things like that. Am I going to a warm climate? And then a win now window. Am I able to actually pursue a ring here? And I think for the reasons that you mentioned, I think the popular thought would be that he'd go to the Chiefs or the Bills or someone that is currently in contention. So when people saw that he went to the Panthers, they're like, "Oh yeah, you wanted to go someplace better, and look at you, you're going to someplace worse." Yeah. And I think there's more to the story there, and I think Carolina may have tipped their hat to him on what they're planning on choosing from a number 1 overall pick standpoint, and that was enough to get Thielen to say, "Hey, I believe in that guy," regardless of who it might be that they pick at number 1, that I think we can either win this year or next year with that quarterback. Thus forth, the actual length of the contract that he did sign, where he thinks within that window they might actually have a shot, which then obviously leans into he may be gleaning into his philosophy on what it takes to win a Super Bowl. Either you need to have Patrick Mahomes or you need to have a rookie scale contract quarterback. I mean, that's me speculating a little bit, but I think that's maybe what went into his criteria. Plus, it's nice weather down there.
Yeah, it is. It's a beautiful area down there. You hit on an interesting note, Gyles, because I think you're spot on that a lot of folks would see that and be like, well, it must have been all about the money for Adam. I mean, he went to Carolina. And it's like, you got to be careful with that, because this whole thing is designed to bring everyone back to the middle. Like, you do really well one season, you pick worse in the draft, you have a harder schedule, right? And then your guys obviously played well, so now they want to get paid, and there's a hard salary cap. So it's designed to draw you back to the pack. And if you fall away from the pack, you pick earlier in the draft and you have an easier schedule. And so that's designed to pull you back up to the pack. So that's where the Panthers are right now. They're naturally going to be drawn back in to the pack. Plus, they're going to add Adam Thielen. They signed Miles Sanders. They signed Von Bell. They got a new head coach. So you got to be careful when you look at it that way with Adam Thielen, because it's like, if you're not careful as a Vikings fan thinking that, come December 2023, Carolina is going to be a playoff team and you're not. And then it's like, geez, that really turned on its head. And it's like, that happens in the NFL all the time, every single year. And I think about like Christian Kirk going from Arizona with Kyler Murray, and he goes to Jacksonville, right, with coming off the Urban Meyer thing. And I bet you there was Cardinals fans that were just like, he went there? Like, what? I mean, well, guess what? I mean, the Cardinals end up firing their coach. Not sure if they believe in their quarterback. They didn't make the playoffs, and the Jaguars made the playoffs. So one anecdotal example there, but that's what happens in this league.
Yep. And I think if you were to explore every division in football, Carolina might be the best and most likely team to win their division. When you look at the strength of division, I'm sorry, but the NFC South is not in a great position right now, especially with the exit of Tom Brady. So Carolina, if they can actually work with this new rookie quarterback that they're perceivably going to draft, I think they're going to be in a great position to make the playoffs and then obviously go on a run.
Yep, I agree with you. Their defense was middle of the road. They are now transitioning to a 3-4, and one of their additions was the Broncos defensive coordinator, Ejiro Evero. Yeah, and so they'll go to a 3-4, but they were middle of the road. I think they were 11th in total and 19th in scoring. So, they can improve there, but their offensive line is pretty good. Yep. And like I said, Miles Sanders, Adam Thielen, they signed Hayden Hurst as well, which I mean, he's not TJ Hawkinson, but he's okay. Yep. They have good draft picks, and I think they're gonna take CJ Stroud probably, or the Kentucky kid. I don't know who they're gonna take, but yeah. So anyway, happy for Adam. Hope he plays well, and we'll see what happens. Now that's a Vikings subtraction. In addition is Byron Murphy, and you and I haven't had the chance to connect on this either. I thought his contract terms were interesting, didn't you? Because it wasn't a break the bank deal for this guy who I think is worth that. So I don't know if he was disappointed in what he was getting for offers and he wants to set himself up for another big payday in 2 years, or if I had just overvalued Byron Murphy in my mind. But I saw the headline at 2 years, 22 million. And I don't keep my ear to the ground enough, Gyles, to like go to the NFLPA's website or whatever and look and read the paragraph 5 of the contract. But I think it was 2 years, 22 million. And I would have thought he was going to sign for more, to be honest. But
I do think there are a couple of void years on the end of it. If I remember correctly, which I think helps, spread that out. But yeah, very, very favorable contract for the Minnesota Vikings.
I thought so. So I love this because even with the caveat that free agency can be fool's gold, and sometimes the best free agent deals for you are the ones that you come in second place on, and I remember Nnamdi Asomugha, like it was like Vikings fans, oh my, like got to get him. And we didn't get him. And everyone was like, what a letdown. I failed the off season. I mean, what an awful contract that ended up being for, I think the Eagles signed him. Or did he go? I can't remember if he came from the Raiders and went to the Eagles or vice versa, but the Vikings were suitors for him. Ended up not getting him, and it's a great thing they didn't. So anyway, at the end of the day, fills a position of need for them. I still think they can get depth there. I would still like an upgrade at nickel corner, but really like the idea of Murphy as your top corner. And it was a signing that I looked at and like gave it a thumbs up to. Like that was a nice one.
Well, and if I remember correctly, he's actually played some slot. So I think there's a potential versatility to Byron, depending on what we do for the rest of the offseason. I mean, there's rumblings on the street that the Vikings are still pursuing other candidates on free agency or on the market. So if they do pursue quarterback more, whether that's via draft, trade, or just general free agency, there's a chance that he could play in the slot because that was definitely a position of need, like you mentioned, for us. That was an area that definitely caused part of our downfall. But honestly, he played pretty well. Now, I think some people go back and forth because they initially go to PFF and say, he only had a 66 grade last year, which is not horrible, but it's also not great. You're, slightly above average, you're right on the precipice of being really, really good, but you're right below that. But when I look at his game by game breakdown, he was a scenario where he was relatively boom or bust. So that's where on the bust ones, from the snap count standpoint, he was a little bit lower. So I don't know if something happened. I haven't been able to look at his tape yet. But seemingly if Brian Flores can bring him in and maximize that upside, he has phenomenal play in him. It's just long as he can make it consistent. Right. I do think that's a pretty intriguing signing for us, especially considering the overall draft or the capital you had to give up to bring him in the door. So honestly, very, very excited. Definitely an addition for that room for us.
Yeah. I'll just wrap it up with this and say, not every free agent signing works out. Free agent signing to this caliber works out. And this one might not, but it looks and feels good to me. And I just think so it's like, we need to improve our cornerback room. And it's like, we'll use a first round pick and then we'll develop some of the guys we have that we really believe in. It's like that's a good plan. However, when you say, you know what, dang it, we're just going to solidify one spot and we're going to go get Byron Murphy Jr. And then it's like for the depth pieces and maybe a complimentary starter, if Duke Shelley doesn't end up working out, then it's like, then we're going to throw all those grassroots ways of doing it into that. We're going to solidify this with a free agent signing, a known commodity that should work. And then we're going to develop and throw a high pick at that. To me is a higher probability of succeeding and trying to generate improvement at that spot. So very good signing, much needed, fills a need. and just takes a little bit of pressure off of everything else involved in the cornerback room. When it comes to drafting one, developing the talent you already have, and then coaching them up. I still wouldn't be opposed to corner being the pick in the first round. I still think you can do that.
I think the part you need to guard against, though, is that when you analyze all the different positions that you can draft in the first round, I think cornerback is one of the ones where it's hard to draft a really productive player in the first round when you're not drafting in like the top 10, because at the end of the day, if they're good, they're going to go right away. So you're almost always going to have to take a subpar corner right away, which means they're going to take a little bit of improvement. So if you're looking at immediately improving your cornerback room, I would say I'm generally of the opinion that you should go grab it on free agency, where you can go instantly improve the room, a guy that's proven, versus a cornerback in the first round on the later half might take a year or two to develop. So if you're looking to instantly get better, that's a space where I'm a little bit concerned. But at the end of the day, I don't disagree with you. I think that's an area where we need to improve for both today and tomorrow, because we don't want to just throw in all in for right now. This year, we need to improve. We also need to consider our cornerback room next year and the year after, because although we do have some dire needs at the moment, we also have some dire needs down the road as well. So although we're signing, for a year or two for this guy, we do need to consider the overall health long-term of the position.
Yep. And I think to augment that also, it's an expensive position. So like even when you get it right, you draft it right, get it right, you might not be able to bring that guy back. Right. I mean, so, an important position to get right, an expensive position to have right. And I think the Vikings took a good step by signing Byron Murphy. So that was one. When they traded for TJ Hawkinson, I was like, geez, that really makes a lot of sense. And then he played, and I'm like, wow, what a trade. That's amazing. I can't say I was immediately that high on the Byron Murphy signing, but when I saw this come through the wire, I was like, that's pretty good. That was a good one. So, all right, Alexander Mattison, Gyles. I have to say I was doubly surprised here. I thought he was going to sign with a different team. And B, I thought it was going to cost much more to keep him, if you were going to keep him, or for another team to sign him. And look, we're not negotiating contracts. We're not agents for players calling GMs and owners. I just was surprised. 2 years, $8 million, $6.25 million guaranteed. Again, it looks like a Vikings friendly deal here.
Yep, I completely agree. I don't know if that's simply Alexander Mattison wanting to stay in purple, or if he loves his house when he lives here. I mean, his kids are in school here or something. But I think the other thing can also be true in the fact that I think the running back market is starting to level set. Now, we mentioned that on a previous few episodes, but I think massive contracts are starting to come to the wayside. And I think obviously Alexander Mattison is not the top premier back in the league. I think he's a solid number 2, and he would be a great number 1 on some teams where he's a very productive running back. So the fact that, like you mentioned, that we were able to get him at this price, I'm very glad at that. Now, I think when you pair that with the fact that Dalvin Cook is still on our roster, that is another part that's kind of interesting to me. I don't know if it's simply because Dalvin Cook had a surgery in the offseason and teams are simply waiting to get a physical on him before willing to trade for him. But it seems odd that you would both pay Alexander Mattison and keep Dalvin Cook in your roster, unless the plan is to move off of Dalvin Cook next offseason. So then next year, not in 2023, but in 2024, Alexander Mattison takes the helm and actually becomes the RB1. I don't know. It's kind of a confusing signing to me.
Me too. I was surprised by it. Initially it signaled to me that Dalvin is in the plans. That's what it signaled to me.
Okay.
Or at a minimum, it signaled to me that the Vikings are posturing as if they aren't moving off of Dalvin.
Okay.
Right. Which you would want to do, right, if you want to increase his value on the market. Because it's like, if you're the Vikings and all you do is give Alexander Mattison a 2-year contract, I don't think they're going to take one in the first round. and you don't do anything with Dalvin, you just stand pat with Dalvin, it looks to me like, well, Dalvin's your guy. You're sticking with Dalvin, which then if I'm another team, I'm like, well, we're going to have to offer more. I mean, he's their guy, right? So that's what it signals to me. Now, there might be a deal in the works. There might be some timing that we're not aware of that is relative to other teams that are interested in Dalvin, and maybe a Dalvin deal is going to happen on draft day or whenever. I don't know, but it looks to me like Dalvin's going to be a Viking next year. Right now, would be my prediction. So,
yeah, which is a relatively high cap hit for that position, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, it looks like they're kind of running it back on offense.
Yes, it does.
I mean, other than the reduction of Adam Thielen, obviously that's a piece of the puzzle. He had a pretty big decline in 2022, but yeah, they're trying to run it back.
Yep, I think they are too. With the change with a full incorporation of Hawkinson as the second option, correct, where you kind of were hybriding with, we got to get Thielen the looks and the targets, but Hawkinson's coming. I mean, I would say that Kwesi and O'Connell probably knew when they traded for Hawkinson that Thielen would not be here next year, right? Agreed. Wouldn't you say that? Yeah. So,
or at least not as existing cap hit, right? Like the assumption that there's no way they could make it work.
Yeah. Yep. So we'll talk more about that in the next segment. Let's get to the last sort of headliner, and it was a somber one. It was a somber one with the passing of Bud Grant. And he was 95 years old, so this is not one that just from a numbers and an age standpoint, probably you can't say you were surprised. However, he had so much vitality late in life, and there was no known like incoming illness or like this was going to come soon. So from that standpoint, it's like, oh man, like a shocker. And interestingly, one of my best friends in life, and certainly my best friend at the Vikings, is Bob Hagan, who was the executive director of public relations, and he's transitioning into a consultant role. Last season was his final season full time, and he had the Vikings threw a retirement party for him the week that Bud Grant died, and so unfortunately Bud wasn't able to be there, but his son Mike Grant was there, and and so it would have been just awesome if Bud would have been able to be there. It would have been one last time that I would have gotten to see him and say hi. I don't remember the last time that would have been when I saw him, probably in 2019 somewhere, but lots of good memories that we all have of Bud Grant. And certainly, I've heard people say Mount Rushmore of the Minnesota Vikings, and I'm like he's the logo. I mean, you could make him the logo, like Mount Rushmore is a high honor, but I mean, that guy is, he's Jerry West for the NBA. I mean, make that man the logo, right? So,
yeah, he's a true titan of industry. I mean, even people that aren't Minnesota Vikings fans know of Bud Grant and his impact on and off the field for the Vikings.
Yeah. I'll always remember he had a birthday one year. I can't remember if this was, I'll have to look on the photo. I have a photo of it, but it was 2014 or 15, and it was his birthday. And so one of the full-time writers with the Vikings who's still there is Lindsay Young. She does great work for the Vikings. But she had a really special relationship with Bud. So for his birthday one year, Lindsay and I went to Nothing Bundt Cake and got him a birthday cake and went over to his house and gave it to him. And I don't think he really was like all into being celebrated. In fact, I know he wasn't, so I don't think he appreciated that. And nor did he really understand what a Nothing Bundt Cake was, like it wasn't so like we had, but it was a great memory and a picture that I have that I'll, always remember. And I didn't post it, but maybe when we post this episode of the Wobcast 2.0, I'll post that picture. But a lot of people have memories like that of Bud. Of course, he had his garage sales, right? I'm sure you've heard about those.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
The whistle to start the garage sale. So certainly an icon in Vikings history, and it'll never be the same without Bud. And for those listening, you're certainly familiar with Bud Grant and his place with the Vikings, but he's really got a broader place in sports. With the University of Minnesota, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and the Minneapolis Lakers. So certainly worth jumping into a rabbit hole and going down and learning more about Bud Grant. Lots of great facts and stats and history with Bud Grant, Minnesota, and the Vikings. So RIP to a legend. All right. Let's talk tight ends, Gyles. And this was a fun one to for me to sort of get ready to do and to prep for, because of what we talked about. I was just so high on the trade for TJ Hawkinson. And I think the presence of Hawkinson makes the tight end discussion for the Vikings different than in previous years when you've had Kyle Rudolph or Irv Smith or Visante Shenko or whoever, because you really have an elite caliber player at that position. Yep. And I think when that's like, he's a foundational player. And I think he's not like Travis Kelce, where he's your wide receiver one essentially, and you can ship Tyreek Hill to the Dolphins and you still have a wide receiver one type player. But I do think he's high end, like wide receiver two, where if I told you put all the tight ends and put all the wide receivers into one group, categorize them as WR1s and WR2s, I think Hawkinson's one of the better WR2s, even with all the other WR2s, right? Okay, so I think that means your actual WR2 can be like can be a developmental guy, or it can be a low end number two and you still feel really good about it. Or you can elevate KJ Osborne to it and still feel good about it because you have TJ Hawkinson. So I think it's an interesting way to look at this position group. The other thing about this position group is, and not just for the Vikings, but in general, it's really changed a lot in the NFL. I mean, you're splitting them out wide, you're flexing them. And so I think with Hawkinson, you have sort of a more modern day version of that player. However, the signing of Josh Oliver signals that you still are valuing the brute and the muscle and the sort of the 12 personnel grouping and the run the ball mentality that position can really bring. So really a fun position to look at, I think, for the Vikings for all of those reasons. And I don't know if you want to start with Josh Oliver or start with TJ Hawkinson, Gyles, but I'm sure you are chock full of opinions and stats on it.
Yes.
So that's sort of the foundation, I think, for this position to discuss. And I think you should take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to discuss both TJ Hawkinson and Josh Oliver and how that relates into the greater state of the Minnesota Vikings tight end room, because at the end of the day, I think the moves this offseason have really indicated the direction the Minnesota Vikings are going to go down. And I'll get to that more in a second. But if we look at TJ Hawkinson first, obviously he had a phenomenal year. And obviously he only played a portion of the year with the Minnesota Vikings. So although he ended the season at a 73.2 offensive grade, I think giving him this offseason to be able to prepare and actually get fully integrated into the offense, I expect him to take a massive step forward, where he was elite in a lot of categories. He was pretty decent at pass blocking and receiving. He had a 76 grade. And when you compare that to his past years, almost every year since his introduction into the league in 2019, he's improved. His 2019 year, he ended the year with an offensive grade of 60.5. And within essentially a 3-year window, he made it up to 73. So he is improving, and I expect him to take even yet another step forward. When you look at even this past season, when you started with the Minnesota Vikings all the way to the end of the season, his last game, even in the playoff game against the Giants, he ended the game with a 90.6 grade. His last few games, he had an 84, a 73. Like, he was doing very, very well. So I think to kind of complement what you're saying, I think TJ Hawkinson is an exact tight end that you want to build around. And although he is wide receiver 2 on our team, in my opinion, I think he would be wide receiver 1 on some teams that lack both positions. I think he's that good. I would put him in a top 5 tight end category. And I do expect him to take a step forward. And I know some people were kind of confused when you transition over into Josh Oliver, because he didn't necessarily get leveraged that much in the passing game for the Baltimore Ravens. But honestly, when you look at for both receiving and pass blocking, he is an elite tight end as well. He just doesn't get as much flash as someone like TJ Hawkinson, where he's one of the best, if not the best, blocking tight end in the league. This guy is a dude. If you're looking to add another essentially offensive lineman, this is one of those categories. Now, he had limited snaps in 2022 when it came to targeting from a pass standpoint. He only had 25 targets, but he still caught 64% of his passes. He actually did pretty good. He averaged 10.9 yards a carry. He had 2 touchdowns. I think when you're looking at his production, I look at that far more as the schematic element of how to get him involved, where if you can get him more involved in the passing game for the Minnesota Vikings, I'm actually intrigued where the Minnesota Vikings can go, because at the end of the day, when we look at the personnel groupings for the Minnesota Vikings, we ran 12 personnel 15% of the time. So to refresh the audience, 12 personnel means you have 2 tight ends, 2 wide receivers, and a running back. So 15% of snaps, we ran 12 personnel. We ran 11 personnel, which is 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and 1 running back, 64% of the time. We ran it a lot. Now, the team that ran the most 11 personnel was the Rams. But when you look at the teams that ran the most 12 personnel, the Seahawks. And for a while, they were sitting great in a number 1 offensive position for a few games. When you look at the high flying offense, they ran 12 personnel 40% of the time. The Packers were 37% of the time. The Jets were 32% of the time. And tied for 4th is the Chiefs. And they ran 12 personnel 32% of the time. So considering the fact that the Chiefs won the Super Bowl, I'm not necessarily against using that as a formula to say, how can the Vikings be better offensively? Because the things that the Chiefs didn't have that I think we do is now we have 1 elite tight end and 1 at least above average tight end. I don't look at the Chiefs and say, oh, you have 2 great tight ends. They ran 12 personnel and they got Kelsey involved. So if we can get both of these guys involved, I actually think that could be a really unique formula for us to be able to go achieve offensive success. Because when you break down all the different elements for 12 personnel, if you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, they ran once again, the 12 personnel, about 20, or I forget the exact percentage I said, but they had a 57% success rate when it came to 12 personnel. So if you sort that, let's see here. At the end of the day, they're one of the top leagues, or the top units in the league in terms of success rate for 12 personnel. And once again, they only had 1 good tight end. So I'm really, really excited about where they can go with 2 tight ends. Yeah.
And so I think and we talked about this, I believe, in the last episode, Gyles, but it's like, you think Kevin O'Connell and you think Rams, Sean McVay, throw the ball all over the place, creative, high scoring, like flashy, whatever. And it's like, yep, he can do that. Like that's something that he can do with the Vikings, and Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson and KJ Osborne, and really knowing how to get people in space. And yes, however, the ability for someone like Kevin O'Connell to draw up those plays and get explosive and have a really productive offense and high scoring, that comes from a creative place. Like it's because they are creative. So that also means that they are not just a 1 personnel type of coach. Like he doesn't have to be in just 11 personnel. O'Connell can be productive in 12 and creative in 12 personnel too. And if you get into a position as an offense where you are able to mash the ball in 12 personnel, I mean, you talk about being able to use play action and bootlegs, and you talk about getting linebackers on TJ Hawkinson and in coverage. That's how you do it. I mean, if you're out there in 12, you're hard pressed as a defense to have a nickel corner out there. I mean, you got to have 3 linebackers out there. And now all of those players that you're sending out in routes and those concepts you're using, you got linebackers trying to defend them. I mean, you're scoring points.
Yep, it's a no-go for the other defense. I completely agree. And I think when you loop that into the accuracy of a quarterback, that's where this becomes even more intriguing, because at the end of the day, like if you can have a tight end against a linebacker that's really, really fast, they're also really tall. So when you think about being able to place the ball really up high, I think that's where the Chiefs have obviously had a phenomenal year when it comes to that. And when you look at Dalton Schultz from the Cowboys, he may be a free agent this year, but last year the Cowboys specifically ran 11 personnel 50% of the time and 12 personnel 31% of the time. And the breakdown, when you look at Chiefs and Cowboys, they almost had the exact same offensive strategy, and the Chiefs went significantly further than the Cowboys. And I think that part of that is because of the accuracy, where they're able to leverage that tight end set and able to actually be productive on it, and actually achieve success. Like I was talking to a guy named Sean, Sean and Mike from Con Expo when I was out there this last week in Vegas, and they're avid Cowboys fans. And they were saying, honestly, when you look at the Cowboys, you're stacked at a lot of positions, but the accuracy of Dak is becoming kind of concerning, where they're wondering if he's the long-term option. So you even have Cowboys that are questioning the accuracy of Dak Prescott. So, when you translate that to the Vikings, we have a very accurate quarterback. So maybe there's a chance that we can try to mimic the success of the Chiefs by mimicking their offensive personnel sets between 11 and 12 personnel.
Yep. I think the other thing too, Gyles, is in this position, you need your finesse pass catchers, you need your blockers, and you need guys who can double dip and play on teams. So the fact that they thought enough about Josh Oliver and his role to go out and spend a free agent contract, 3 years and $21 million on it, it tells me that in their plan, they have a very clearly defined role and need for this. And they went out and filled it and got it. Yeah. And I like that. It shows vision to me. I mean, what'd you want to go sign a lesser version of TJ Hawkinson? I mean, I don't think that would have been great. I think even though you can't see it, it's an important role, the one that Josh Oliver is going to play. And since you need it, the Vikings went and got an industry best practice at that role. And they're obviously going to need it. So another signing I was really in favor of, and I just think it makes the room better. And any developmental guys that you have now, they have a better chance of succeeding because they're not going to be thrust into a role too soon. You're covered for your starting tight ends. Your starting pass catching tight end is Hawkinson. And your starting utility blocking tight end is Josh Oliver. So Johnny Munt or whoever else you draft or bring in here, there's less pressure on them to perform or overperform, and they can be put in their natural roles. They can develop. So I just look at the roster and I'm like, tight end's a great position for the Vikings. And I don't poo-poo that. I think that's a position that it makes sense to be good at. Look at the Eagles and the Chiefs. Look at the Niners, teams that were in the Super Bowl or were in the conference title games. They got good tight ends. All of them do. Good rooms. And the Vikings do have one. So,
Yeah, no, and it further emphasizes the Vikings' priority on pass protection or blocking in general, but understanding we want to be able to have the ability to block when necessary. I think that has been one of the common denominators for the Vikings the past few years, that when we needed to have success, we fell short because pass protection fell apart, where the opposing team knew what we were going to do and we couldn't protect against it. So we're trying to load up on the front lines to be able to ensure that when push comes to shove, we can still achieve success when the other team knows what we're going to do.
Yeah. So, one thing too that I just thought of, Gyles, because you mentioned a tight end as not predicting it, but like a sleeper, wouldn't that be kind of interesting as a first round pick? Right. And so now that it's like what we talked about, you got the blocking utility role that's locked up, and the pass catching tight end that's locked up now. So now it's like, if there's a tight end early in the draft, first 100 picks, let's say, maybe not first round, maybe first round, but first 100 picks. And it's like, but he can't really block, or it's like, but he's not a great pass. It's like, you know what? We're good there. We don't need a plug and play guy there. He's so good at this that it's worth taking him and developing that while we really benefit from this. You can now do that at tight end because you're set at that position. And we talked about this. If you're looking at all draft picks are can you help us now? Can you help us now? It's like, that's not a position of strength in the draft. I mean, you're planting seeds in the draft. And when you sign a Josh Oliver and you have a TJ Hawkinson, it's planting season at tight end. It just puts you in a position of strength.
And I think to quickly call out Josh Oliver one more time, because I think you're absolutely correct. If we could draft a tight end in the first round, I think a year or two from now, you're in a phenomenal position to have an amazing tight end room for the long term. But even for the short term, Josh Oliver is no schmuck. He was still the 19th ranked tight end out of 120 qualified tight ends. So it's not like he's above average, if not he's not top 10 necessarily, but he's definitely in the top 20. So when you compare a top 5 tight end and a top 20 tight end, there's not too many other tight end rooms in the league that have that type of tandem.
You're right. You're right, Gyles, too. And this is partially, I play fantasy football, so I don't want to say this and come off as thumbing my nose to it or putting us on a pedestal at all. But the fantasy football culture that we have in the NFL, it sort of creates it's a pitfall in your evaluation of how good and valuable certain players and types of players are. So Josh Oliver is a good, and there are others like Josh Oliver. So it's not just like, oh, we like the Vikings and everything the Vikings do is great. But Josh Oliver is a good example of this, where it's like, right, he doesn't have a ton of targets. He's not on a top 5 or 10 tight ends list in Fantasy Football Magazine, so you don't know his name. But if you truly had just like in the real NFL, a tight ends draft, it's like, hey, all of your tight ends are in the pool now, and we're going to hold a draft, tight ends only. Like Josh Oliver's going before some of the tight ends that you would pick very early on in a fantasy football draft, because it's like roster builders, team builders in the NFL know what Josh Oliver can do for your team from a blocking standpoint, from a special team standpoint, and supplementing the passing attack standpoint. It's like, he might not, like, I'm just thinking about, like, in my head, I'm thinking about like Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz in his prime would have been a very high draft pick in that hypothetical tight end draft. But I think Josh Oliver would go before Zach Ertz right now in like a real NFL tight end draft. Like, who do you want on your team? People are picking Josh Oliver, And so the other thing is, you're not taking a flyer or standing on the table for a semi-unknown commodity. This just in, the Baltimore Ravens like to run the ball. Josh Oliver played a lot for the Baltimore Ravens. So if he can do it for Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh, I think he can do it for almost anyone, including the Vikings. You know what I mean?
And when he was targeted from a pass standpoint, he did very, very well. It's just he wasn't targeted very often. So if you can work him in schematically, I think there's a pretty decent upside there. And then on top of that, he's only 25 years old. So you're getting some guy that's right into his first contract. So there's a lot of upside with Josh Oliver.
So when are we enshrining him in Canton? I couldn't remember.
Yeah, that's next week, next Tuesday at 3.
Okay. So we don't want to be too high. I guess some people are driving off the road as they're listening to this. We're not, we want to be, let's temper our enthusiasm. Maybe we're not saying he's going to Canton, but we do like the signing. And look, the last time we cracked the mic, the Vikings did not have Byron Murphy.
Nope.
Alexander Madison was on the street, and they did not have Josh Oliver. And right now they do. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, the Bears are coming, and look out for the Lions, favorites to win the division. But the Vikings are not exactly going backwards here this offseason.
No.
And I think the Vikings are an example of a team, and to sort of wrap up, not just the tight end discussion, but maybe this episode of the Wobcast here. So if you have any other notes to get to, Gyles, get them ready. But, the Vikings were a team, I think, if you could offseason categorize teams as like just a few things to figure out and they're good, and lots of stuff to figure out and they're good, lots of stuff to figure out and they're bad, I would categorize the Vikings as like a really good team, but a lot of things to figure out. Right.
Yep.
And we've gone through the list of those things that they have to figure out in all these episodes of the Wobcast. I mean, it was a big list. Like the Vikings honeydew list this offseason was a big one, whereas some other teams, it wasn't as big. But the Vikings are systemically, they're getting through them. They're going through them. And I don't know that they've done anything where I was like, Oh boy, I don't know about that. I really don't know. I think you were higher on Brian Flores than I was, but I'm not down on that. But I'm not really going about anything. Now, if Dalvin at his cap number might be one of those where I'm like, oh, really? But if they have a great plan for him, if they're going to throw it to him, and if they have a good plan for him, I can dig it. But I kind of like how they're going through it right now. And really, this is buoyed by the Murphy signing and the Josh Oliver signing. Those were two things where I was just like, man, those are wins. Those are absolute wins. I really like those. So I got to give credit, I guess, to Kwesi and O'Connell for the way they're handling this in the offseason, because there's a lot of hoops to jump through and hurdles to get over, and they're not falling down in any of them yet.
And this would be pure speculation, but I anticipate the Vikings to try to re-sign Duke Shelley, to try to further solidify the cornerback room. And then in the first round, they either draft a linebacker or a wide receiver. That's my prediction, because at the end of the day, we did get Jordan Hicks to take a pay cut, but I think he's only under contract for one more year. And so when you think about the draft as what can I do next year? I think a linebacker could be a really interesting element, because Brian Asamoah, I expect to take a step forward, especially with a starting position. So if you can improve the middle linebacker room, I know we've talked a lot about that. That was one of the biggest deficiencies for the Minnesota Vikings. If you can improve that, then you're great. I do think the second wide receiver is kind of a question mark. Now, maybe they think that KJ Osborne can step into that role, or Jalen Naylor, especially if you plan on operating in a 12 personnel unit most of the time, or at least a much bigger percentage of the time. It becomes less of a priority, but I do expect them to be more active in free agency yet before the draft. Not draft a cornerback, but sign one in free agency, and then either go wide receiver or linebacker in the first round.
Yeah, I think the first round pick may be the exception here, but beyond that, it's really gotta get off the rails, or be a lot of curious selections for me to immediately after a draft be sharply critical of it. Because just having the perspective, I think you and I share it, but yours is from following the game closely for a long time and giving it a lot of thought. And mine is from that and having the fortune of being with a team for 15 years. The draft is not supposed to be something that gets you to be able to win the next year. You cannot look at it through that prism. You have to look at it through, like, what's your system? How are you at developing players? What's your vision? You're building a roster. You're not winning games with draft picks. You're building a roster with draft picks, So other than what they do in the first round and looking at the trades they make, their output in the draft is not going to affect how I view their offseason. It's really not, So what's going to affect my grade when we grade their offseason eventually is stuff like Josh Oliver and Byron Murphy, and making the hard but right decision on Kendricks, and the hard but potentially right decision on Thielen, and being cunning enough to get Murphy and re-sign Duke Shelley. Like, those are much more impactful to me than who'd you take in the third round. Oh, a linebacker from UCLA? No, you should have taken that guard from Texas Tech. I don't know. Like, that's splitting hairs there. Splitting hairs. But getting Byron Murphy and Josh Oliver, that is not splitting hairs. Like, those are winning moves. So I still think the draft is worth talking about, and we're getting pretty close to it, actually. Like, we'll start looking at maybe some prospects and watching guys, and having some opinions on what they can do. But I think it's really important to have that right perspective on the draft, and its place in the roster building process. It's not, you don't win games with draft picks, you build rosters. So
agreed. And we didn't even mention Marcus Davenport in free agency. I think he was one of the best edge rushers that we signed. Although he's had some injuries in the past, I think he's a phenomenal addition if he can stay healthy. It'll be interesting to see how that translates into what our overall outside linebacker room looks like when you have Daniil Hunter and Zadarius Smith. Both of them are still technically under contract and on the Minnesota Vikings. So depending on what he does on the defensive roster, if that means that we're going to exit one of those players or if we just want to sign him for depth. But interesting move nonetheless, and a quality signing considering his cap.
It is. It is. And his omission from my notes or whatever is a little bit of an oversight. It just didn't register with me when I was going through Thielen and Byron Murphy and Bud Grant and all that. But I think the Davenport signing, Gyles, is definitely like a bunch of scouts getting together and being like, this guy, I mean, I know he was hurt, but this guy's a monster, and it's like, I'm sure that Kwesi and his staff probably had a really high grade on Davenport when he was coming out, and they weren't on the team that drafted him, which was the Saints. And in fact, the Saints traded 2 first-round picks to get up there to get him. And the Saints, by the way, at that time had Sean Payton and still have Mickey Loomis as their GM. Very, very skilled evaluators and roster builders, team builders. So I like it a lot. I don't know what it signals for Hunter and Zadarius and all of that. It just, to me, it is absolutely, to me, it's got the mark of a bunch of scouts with really high grades when he was coming out in the draft, saw him become available, and they're like, let's take a chance on him. Like, if he stays healthy and if this and if that, then this. And they didn't break the bank for him. They essentially took a flyer on him. So
another calculated move by Mr. Kwesi.
Yeah, right. And I'm not trying to go over the top on it. I'm just saying a lot of stuff to sort through and figure out, and they're doing it. They're doing it right now, and they still have some more things to get to. But so far so good, I think, for the Vikings offseason. And NFC North is interesting, Gyles. I think I'd install the Vikings as a favorite. But I think if you looked at every favorite in every division, I don't know that they'd be one of the heavier favorites. I think they'd be in the bottom half of the favored teams to win their division. And I'd put the Lions just right there, if not even. And I actually think the unknown in the division is the Packers. I don't think the Bears are the unknown. I think the Bears' arrow's pointing up, but they're beneath the Lions. It's really about Jordan Love. I think the Packers are a huge question mark. I don't sense that we're getting Favre, Rodgers, Love. I don't think that's coming.
I don't think so either. If they do, you better buy as much stock in the Packers as you can, because that's the luckiest franchise in history.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think that's coming, but I don't know that it's dumpster fire either with Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. But interesting division. I think the Vikings are right in the thick of it. And so far, I overall, I really like what they're doing in the offseason. And I think you and I probably share that opinion. So
agreed.
Let's see. For position groups, we're kind of getting to the end of the offense.
This is true.
So I think we'll go to defense. Gyles really loves a player who stands to see an increased role in the Vikings defense this season. Do you know who I'm alluding to?
I do.
What's his name?
Mr. Brian Asamoah or Josh Metellus? One of the two.
Nope, Asamoah. Metellus, Metellus too. We talked a lot about Metellus and Duke Shelley, but Brian Asamoah is someone that you were sort of you were bringing to our attention, like even during the season, so we haven't spent a lot of time talking linebackers. I think maybe we should shift our focus to defense and talk linebackers.
Agreed.
In the next episode of the Wobcast 2.0. So being in a 3-4 defense, though, it's a lot to tackle to talk linebackers, because you've really got a few different positions to think about. You got your inside backers, then your strong side and weak side, and then you have an edge rushing component too. So It'll be a lot to discuss and talk through, but I think we should do linebackers the next time we crack the mic. And then, of course, we can tackle a whole bunch of other news notes and nuggets that happen between now and then. Did we omit anything from your notebook for this episode of the Wobcast, though?
No, I think we covered it. We definitely covered a lot of the Minnesota Vikings offense, and excited to hop over onto the other side of the ball.
Yeah, I am too. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Wobcast. It was episode 6 of season 2. If you've missed any previous ones, or you want to listen back to anything we said today, or you may have missed today, you can find the Wobcast 2.0 wherever you find your other podcasts. Google Play, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, chief among them. We're also on YouTube. Find me on social at Wobby on Twitter. We're also on Instagram, the Wobcast. So go find us there. We're trying to post as much interesting content as we can. So Chase unable to join us. On behalf of Chase and of course my co-host Gyles, this is Wobby signing off for now. The Wobcast 2.0 back next week to talk linebackers and defense. Until then, we sign off. Skol Vikings.